The Pittsburgh Steelers have a new wide receivers coach, Frisman Jackson. Kind of came out of nowhere and surprised a lot of people because Ike Hilliard had been the team's receivers coach. And people are wondering what's the tone for the wide receivers moving forward in the first year of having no Ben Roethlisberger. Exploring that question and a lot more with me on this show today is Brian Batko of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, a returning guest of this show. I'm Chris Carter, host of the Locked On Steelers podcast. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things of the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find us on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Odyssey, and YouTube. Hit the like button if you're watching this video on YouTube, or subscribe to our YouTube channel for all of our daily content. We thank you for making us your first listen every day. And today's episode is brought to you by Get Upside. Just download the free Get Upside app on your phone today and use the promo code TOUCHDOWN to get 25 cents per gallon or more cash back when you fill up on your next tank. Joining me today, as I said before, is Brian Batko of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. He's back, the Batko man. What's up, Brian? How you been?
What's up, Chris? I am a little confused, though. Like, you're talking about Frisman Jackson, Steelers wide receivers. I thought, am I not here to talk for, a half hour or whatever about the Steelers luring Tom Brady out of retirement to be their quarterback? What's up?
No, listen. That's the hard-hitting stuff. We leave that to you guys at the we leave that to you guys at the Pittsburgh Post.
That's what I came
You guys
to
cover
do.
that kind of Listen, man, I already had a brief segment about Kyler Murray and that stuff. I'm not even trying to get into Tom Brady returning and all that jazz. But but it is funny when Tom Brady says never say never, and it's like, don't you do that. Don't you Brett Favre this. Because I'm not trying. I was ready when he said he was done, it was over with. I was like, okay, fine. We don't have to consider this anymore, but he'll be back. But I do want to talk to you about Frisman Jackson and how this thing played out. Because Brian, you're there all the time. We see each other a lot at the Steelers practice facility. This it came off to me like a blindside. Like I was like, wait, what? Ike Hilliard's just gone? How did that come off to you, and what did that say to you about the direction that they're trying to go with this receiver room?
Yeah, I mean, 100%. Same thing. It was, February 7th? I mean, you don't expect to see too many staff shakeups. I mean, they still need to hire a couple people, O-line coach and assistant, I guess, and maybe outside linebackers coach. But you don't expect to see somebody axe from the previous year this late into the game. I mean, right. I know Mike season wrap up that there's change is just what it is in this business. There's going to be change. They're going to look at ways to get better. But it did come out of nowhere. It's honestly kind of unclear. You would assume that the Steelers wanted to move on from Ike Hilliard versus, there's only 32 of those jobs for receivers coaches. But did he want to move on for some reason? It's very vague and murky right now. All we know is that he's out. Frisman Jackson is in. And I guess, just given my old knowledge of the mid-90s or 2000s Giants, I'm only surprised that he wasn't replaced by Amani Toomer.
those teams that almost because I still remember I had the little electric football men because my father wanted me to not play Madden as much because he said video games are destroying your life. So I had the Ravens 2000 team and the Giants 2000. Those were my first two teams of electronic football men. I always remember Ike Hilliard because he was on that team. But looking at this situation, Brian, I look at this. I see Frisman Jackson. He comes in. He's a younger guy. Hasn't coached a long time in the NFL. He's kind of bounced between college and the NFL. But he did do a good job with DJ Moore and Roddy Anderson over at Carolina. DJ Moore had 2 1,000 yard seasons with him there. Robbie Anderson had 1, and neither of them had really great quarterbacking. It was Teddy Bridgewater or Sam Darnold or old man version of Cam Newton there. And I have to wonder if maybe that's part of the approach here, is that are the Steelers trying to get a guy who can help receivers make the most out of working with quarterbacks that they know just aren't, as talented with their arm, talented with their accuracy, but also, in tune with the rest of the offense.
Or it could just be as simple as Steelers wide receivers were the most penalized group in the entire league last year at that position. Diontae Johnson, Chase Claypool, whether it was pre-snap, after the snap. I mean, they they had a lot of issues in that regard. And when you look at resumes specifically for position coaches in the NFL, it's really difficult to decipher sometimes what it all means. If Ike Hilliard gets another job, he's going to have some bullet points on there about the step forward that Diontae Johnson took, Chase Claypool's rookie year, and now look, he's not here anymore. So to me, if anything, I mean, the tone that it sets for these guys is just you better get comfortable being uncomfortable, because maybe they were a little too comfortable last year, thinking that they were one of the best units in the league. And sure, they lost JuJu, but individually they still had some struggles, as I just mentioned. So it could have just been time for a change. It could be a way to signal to these guys that maybe you really liked Ike Hilliard, maybe you were really vibing with him, but maybe you need somebody to come in and shake things up a little bit, because we need more out of you guys. So James Washington's another one we didn't even mention. He just never progressed under Hilliard's watch either. So I'm not going to profess to know a ton about what Frisman Jackson's bringing to the table, but sometimes you just need a change of scenery, especially for young players, and it looks like that's what they're getting here.
Certainly. I mean, and like you were alluding to too, it's not just the on-field play, it's the off-field stuff. You had Diontae Johnson dropping the ball, but no Steeler fan is going to forget soon Chase Claypool pointing with the ball in against the Minnesota Vikings when they needed to spike the ball in the final drive, and then that costing them precious seconds in a game that they lost when Ben Roethlisberger was within striking distance of the end zone. Moments like that, and then of course him talking about maybe we should have music in practice or things like that. Maybe that's part of it. Maybe Frisman Jackson, again, I'm not professing, I'm the same as you. I'm not professing like I know who Frisman Jackson is and what kind of a coach that he is and if he's going to be no nonsense about that. But maybe you're right. Maybe it's just a matter of, hey, we want a new look guy that comes in here and we're going to tell him like, hey, these are the things that we want you to establish in this new wide receiver room. And I do wonder if that's part of the shakeup here, is a message sent to these guys, because again, both Johnson and Claypool are still on their rookie deals. It might be a message like, look, if you want to get a contract after that, you better clean some stuff up, or we're gonna reload really fast.
Yeah, and you also can't overlook that Frisman Jackson has a little bit of a history with Matt Canada. So, maybe Ike Hilliard and him didn't quite see eye to eye. One of those guys with an extensive NFL resume. The other one who is, hypothetically the boss in that scenario, not so much of an NFL resume. At least in this case, you're bringing in someone who has familiarity with the offensive coordinator, has seen his stuff work, better than it did last year in the past. So, never hurts to have some cohesion on your coaching staff, especially if maybe some people don't think Canada is the guy long term, but it sure seems like he's coming back for next year, and now he's got somebody he knows, and vice versa.
Yeah, that could also be part of the room, because when we talk about coordinating, and I've talked about on this show before, it's not just about calling plays. It's about being able to get guys at the positional coach positions to say, hey, you guys are going to come to me with what you think works the best with your guys, what you've gotten out of them, and saying, hey, these are the things that we do well. And then my job as a coordinator is to mash all that into our concepts and our plan of attack each week. So, maybe that was part of it, because you certainly saw, Ben Roethlisberger yelling at Ike Hilliard on the sideline a couple times late in the season, particularly because Ray McCloud was out there and James Washington wasn't. And it's just like, why was that? You were asking that question on Twitter, just like the rest of America, when it came to what the heck was going on there. And maybe that's another factor in this, is that, he didn't get enough out of other guys, and they had to rely on Ray McCloud so much.
Or a guy who's in there, whether maybe it's a normal contributor, he's missing the hot read, and that's what Ben needed to get the ball out quick. So those are things that, when you talk about the Claypool missteps, you talk about that, you talk about Diontae Johnson, his drop issues arising again at the end of the year at the worst possible time. Those all seem like coaching things to me. And again, to your point, position coaches, are they kind of a dime a dozen in the NFL for the most part? Probably. I don't know that there's a huge variance in terms of the job that you can do there. It's mostly going to come down to the Jimmies and Joes versus the X's and O's when you're coaching wide receivers, running backs, things of that nature. But it's a spot where the Steelers were expected to be really good, expected to be a bright spot in 2021. And for a number of reasons, it didn't quite turn out that way.
It didn't. But I do think it's intriguing to talk about the standing of the Steelers wide receiver room in a historical sense, because for so long it's just been like, yeah, Steelers wide receivers, they're awesome. They're the best in the division, one of the best in the country. That's what they operate. We're going to talk about that, where they stand now, and what the new direction might be without Ben Roethlisberger, because he's been part of that step for 18 years as far as establishing, how good the Steelers receivers are in the NFL. So we'll be talking about that in just a minute here. But first, got to talk to you guys about Get Upside. Steelers fans, this is Chris Carter with an incredible app everyone who buys gas needs to know about. It's called Get Upside. My listeners are earning cash back for every gallon of gas every time they fill up. Just download the free Get Upside app in the App Store or Google Play right now and use the promo code TOUCHDOWN, and you get 25 cents per gallon or more on your first fill up. And that's going to be cash back. Don't pay full price at the pump anymore. Get cash back using Get Upside. Just download the app for free and use promo code TOUCHDOWN to get 25 cents per gallon or more in your first tank. Some people who drive a lot are making as much as $200 or $300 a year in cash back, and there's no catch. The cash back gets added right to your account. You can then cash out at any time to your bank account, PayPal, an e-gift card for Amazon, and other brands. Just download the free Get Upside app and use promo code TOUCHDOWN to get 25 cents per gallon or more cash back on your first tank. Again, that's promo code TOUCHDOWN on the Get Upside app. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm Chris Carter here with Brian Batko of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Brian, let's keep talking about this wide receiver room because, everyone's been, it's funny because everyone's been excited about both Diontae Johnson and Chase Claypool at one point or another. Chase Claypool having 13 touchdowns, including the playoffs in his rookie season. A lot of people get excited for that. He had a similar amount of yards, nowhere near similar amount of touchdown production. Diontae Johnson, really good first, I'd say, 10, 12 games he had this season where he was at least more consistent as far as getting open and catching the ball. And then wherever it was, and I'd say in maybe early to mid-December, the drops returned and he became the liability that he was late last season or late in 2020. But what has to happen for this receiver room to kind of get back to being the group that for so long Steelers fans loved? I mean, you went from having in the early 2000s, you had Plaxico Burress and Hines Ward and Antoine Randall, and then Hines Ward, Randall, and then you had Santonio Holmes, and then Santonio Holmes left. You got Mike Wallace and Antonio Brown and Emmanuel Sanders. Then eventually it was Antonio Brown and Martavis Bryant. And then JuJu comes, and then these guys come in. And now you're at this state where it's kind of like you've had this really good run of production there. Is this kind of a place where that cuts off because maybe the team isn't focusing as much on the passing game while they rebuild the defense and maybe make this a stronger ground game?
Yeah, no, I mean, I still think these guys can produce at a high level. I mean, you just look at the physical traits. Diontae Johnson was unguardable at times this year. I mean, he still went for 1,000+ yards, made the Pro Bowl as an alternate, but the skills are there. The athletic gifts are there. He fit in really well with late stage Ben Roethlisberger because we know it was all about getting the ball out quick and throw short and run long. That's Diontae Johnson's game. A guy who didn't mesh quite as well maybe with Ben's skill set late in his career was Chase Claypool. I feel like there were a lot of deep ball chances that sometimes Claypool couldn't quite come down with it. Sometimes Ben couldn't quite get it there. So I think no matter what happens to get the most out of this group, they're just going to need to be on the same page with whoever's under center. That wasn't always the case with those guys and Ben. Of course, they were younger. He's a lot older in the game and didn't have that same rapport. He's working with a bunch of guys, save for JuJu, who he barely knew. Remember Diontae Johnson's rookie year, Ben was out with the elbow injury. So they got to get on the same page with whoever it is, whether it's a guy coming back, Mason Rudolph, Dwayne Haskins, or if it's somebody new from the outside. If it's a rookie, that'd be an interesting dynamic because, like I just said, these couple guys, assuming JuJu's not back, they don't have all that much experience with winning, at least winning at a high level in the NFL either. So if it's a veteran, that would be intriguing in its own right, but they need to mesh well with the physical and kind of the X's and O's aspect of whoever the replacement is for 7.
Yeah, that's a big part of this. And it's something that I think might be a little bit bigger than people are considering in this offseason. While we're all talking about the importance of finding a new quarterback and all that, but if how much investment should you put into a receiver group when you're trying to rebuild so much? You're trying to get a new offensive line. You probably need a new center, new offensive tackle, maybe a new offensive guard along with that, and whether that's free agency or the draft. And then you're still looking at Devin Bush, getting him a partner or being prepared if Devin Bush is just going to play like he did in 2021 for the rest of his career. You're going to need a new cornerback, whether that's Witherspoon or Hayden or the guy that replaces them or both, a combination of those things. And that still doesn't include other depth pieces. You need to sign Terrell Edmonds or a replacement for him. there's a lot of things you have to consider, but the wide receiver room is kind of one that the Steelers haven't had to think too much about in recent years. And it's odd, I'm looking at this and I'm thinking like they just drafted Chase Claypool 2 years ago and Diontae Johnson the year after that, the year before that, and JuJu SmithSchuster, but like this, they shouldn't need to do this, but maybe they do need to do this because they maybe they need to put an influx of talent in there. This is a good receiver class. I think there's a lot of talented guys, but how much emphasis do you think they should put on it, regardless of if they get Mason Rudolph at quarterback or Teddy Bridgewater at quarterback or say Aaron Rodgers at quarterback?
I think if JuJu comes back, and I wouldn't be too eager to try to make that happen. I think he's going to want more than the Steelers will be comfortable offering him, and wasn't doing a whole lot in this offense before his injury anyway, maybe through no fault of his own. Maybe that's just what they were asking of him. But if that's what you're asking of him, don't pay him $8 million a year to do that. So assuming he's not back, I would like to see probably a top 3 or 4 round pick on getting a new receiver in here. The other part of that conversation that you alluded to, I wouldn't be real comfortable giving a second contract to Diontae Johnson. I don't think you should force that. We know that over the years, the Steelers haven't done that for a lot of wideouts other than AB. You can kind of say they did that with JuJu, but we know it was a weird situation. Right. Came back on a 1-year deal. So, you had asked me 2 months ago, I would have said it looked like Diontae Johnson's, playing himself into a nice another 4-year deal here, but I wouldn't feel comfortable doing that, at least not for probably what he'll be worth on the open market to another team, because I just haven't seen it enough. I haven't seen those number one receiver qualities and traits. Best case scenario is you get a rookie in here who can play right away. And like you said, it's another good receiver draft class. We've been saying that every year because guys are just more ready coming out of college to play the spot in the pros than they ever have been before. So it's a good class. So you get somebody in here who's new, fresh, can help you out, maybe with some speed. I think their offense has been lacking that, especially at wide receiver. So you get a guy like that, and then I think best case is Chase Claypool kind of returns the form the way he was his rookie year. Maybe that's your guy that you lock up long-term if he proves to be a true number one, but clearly he's still got a long way to go.
He does, and I think that's definitely part of the conversation when it comes to building. You want to make sure that the guys that you want in the locker room are guys that you want in the locker room, not just guys that just happen to be, oh well, he's kind of talented, we're going to keep him around. But then because you give that second contract, like you said, your JuJu got a kind of temporary one, but Antonio Brown got that second contract. I mean, other than that, Hines Ward is the only other one that was brought back for long-term money. The Steelers have been so used to just use and recycle wide receivers. And, that was a kind of a calling card for Kevin Colbert and Mike Tomlin for quite some time. Even more so just Kevin Colbert before Mike Tomlin. But with this being, most likely Kevin Colbert's last year, I'm intrigued back, Brian, if you're going to see, if you're going to see kind of the Steelers maybe take a step back from being able to recruit, to find wide receivers, unless Brandon Hunt or Louis Riddick or whoever takes over the GM position or the personnel department. Is that something that you see maybe becomes laxed in the coming years?
I mean, I think that their ability to find wide receivers in the draft, sometimes high up, but more often mid to late rounds was part evaluation skills on the part of Kevin Colbert and his staff, but also, it's part luck. Let's not lie about that. The draft is a crapshoot to some degree. It's an inexact science. James Washington was a second rounder. They did not hit on. It's pretty clear to say that at this point. I mean, he had everything that you would look for. I mean, he had college production. He had, ability to stretch the field, and he never took that next step. So Diontae Johnson and Chase Claypool been good, but to some degree, like we just talked about, the jury is still out. So I just think it's one of those situations where you do need an influx of talent. It would have been great if JuJu could have been that next guy to kind of carry on the tradition from Hines to AB and so on and so forth. But, injuries got in the way. I think some of his own lack of production got in the way. But, this unit's at a crossroads I didn't necessarily expect, because I thought it was one of the best position groups on the team coming into last year. I thought they were underrated nationally and league-wide, but clearly much more middle of the pack at best. And the Steelers are going to kind of have to reckon with that. Let's also point out, too, last time they tried to kind of go from outside the organization and bring in a bigger name free agent at receiver, Dante Moncrief didn't even make it through the season before struggling with drops and
Jeez.
everything. He was useless and not a good fit here.
Right. And I mean, that was a guy who was a speedster. Everyone was really excited about him. And then he injured his hand one time and then he was just Mr. Drops. It was just bad all around. So I mean, like you're absolutely right. The Steelers have had plenty of misses when it comes to trying to go after a wide receiver. Again, they found success. The question I think for this offseason will be, do you bank on these guys to be part of that future success? And how well do these guys play in an offense that's going to depend on probably a less than franchise caliber quarterback? When you're looking at the all likelihood that they're going to, probably starting Mason Rudolph or a rookie in a QB class that's not that highly talented, or a veteran that they sign in free agency who isn't, a superstar. And I think that's one thing that the past several wide receiver groups have benefited from. They had Ben Roethlisberger, and as much as you and I are, we're a lot more open about talking about Ben Roethlisberger's mistakes than I think a lot of people are. But when it comes down to it, I mean, a lot of times Mike Wallace, he was a star with the Pittsburgh Steelers. I mean, I remember ESPN used to compare him to Calvin Johnson with some of the numbers he put up. And then as soon as he left for Miami, he was nowhere near that. And then, Emmanuel Sanders is probably the one guy who made it work because he was able to be consistent. Plus he went to Peyton Manning. That certainly helped as well. But it's interesting to see where the legacy of Steelers wide receivers is after, for the better part of 2 decades, it was considered like that they were wide receiver university of the NFL.
And Wallace was a perfect fit for the quarterback that Ben was at that time. Huge arm, get him behind the defense, take the top off, and they'll both make you pay. So that's obviously just not the quarterback he's been since the injury. And I guess the last thing, the bottom line, I think, I sort of touched on it before. I do think in today's NFL, this is a position that you can kind of turn things over quickly and find that next guy and find new talent. So we'll see if that's ultimately the way that the Steelers have to go with these wide receivers. But if they don't, it'll be a shame because, just at the beginning of last year, there was so much promise and it seemed like they had a really bright future together.
It is a shame, and we will see where they go. It's also, of course, important to talk about, the team, losing Daryl Drake, a few years ago in the tragic way that they did, and then having to bring in Ray Sherman, and maybe that played a role in the shaking up of that wide receiver room that was extremely young. But they need to kind of reestablish some stability there, certainly moving forward. But I want to talk to Brian about some defense in a bit here because Terrell Austin was made official the defensive coordinator. We all knew that was the case. The reports were out. We knew that was the case. But I want to talk to Brian about his thoughts about Austin being officially named and what kind of changes we might see in the defense, because there's some interesting perspectives that I think that some people have offered as far as what the defense actually looks like. So we'll do that in just a minute. But first, I got to talk to you guys about betonline.net. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before as football continues its march to the Super Bowl with the big game in just a couple days. BetOnline.net remains the best spot for all your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. And it's not just football. BetOnline has up-to-the-minute info on pro and college hoops, NHL, boxing, UFC, along with live real-time updates and current games. Don't wait to take advantage of all the new and amazing offers available for the 2022 season at BetOnline, where the game starts. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm Chris Carter. He's Brian Batko from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. We are continuing to talk about the Steelers, but flipping from the wide receiver room to the defense, because Terrell Austin was named officially the defensive coordinator. It's no secret. I talked about this on the Monday episode of this week. Brian, we've known this. Jerry Dulac from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, broke this, and it's been known. But there's now the question as far as a lot of people are saying, what's the defense even going to look like? Some people look back and they say, oh, Terrell Austin, his last defense with Cincinnati wasn't that good. He was giving up 500-yard games and stuff like that. And I'm like, okay, but when you look at the secondary's production with the Steelers, I think that speaks well to what he's been able to do in at least that group alone. I also think that, as much as people are saying like he's not going to call the plays. Well, before we get into the rankings or anything, what's your take on, because everyone talks about Mike Tomlin has called the plays since Dick LeBeau, and no defensive coordinator just stands around. I wanted to hear your take on that and how much that'll apply to Terrell Austin's role.
That doesn't bother me too much. I mean, I think there's so many coaches across the league who call the plays on one side or the other. You do see it more on offense, but Tomlin cut his teeth in this league coaching defense, so that makes sense. it's not something he did right away when he got here, but it's something that he worked his way into and clearly thought it was best for the organization. Now you can debate that much, but we know he wants to win football games, so he wouldn't be doing that if he didn't think that that's what was best for the Steelers. So I'll be curious to see if he comments on this, Chris, because you've been there in the past where he's kind of sort of been asked about the actual order of operations on game day and how that all works, and he never really wants to speak on it. He usually says he doesn't want to peel back the curtain on that, but Keith Butler didn't have a problem doing that after retirement. So I think it got overblown a little bit because, as you kind of mentioned there jokingly, he didn't just stand around. He didn't have a Eaton Park menu in his hand. I think it was, if you listen to the players he coached, especially in the front seven, he was doing a lot to dial up that pressure. He was instrumental in their blitz packages. They've led the league in sacks, 5 years in a row now?
5 years.
If anything, that's a lot to replace in your pseudo defensive coordinator. So, but on the other hand, if you want to look at it from a positive perspective, Terrell Austin was already doing a lot. At practice, he is very involved with making the calls and helping guys out on the back end. And I think they've been grooming him for this ever since they hired him and gave him that senior defensive assistant title. That's a little bit out of the ordinary for the Steelers. And in that sense, this was a long time coming.
Right. And that's the thing when, I think Mark Caboli tweeted out at one point, he was like, basically he's been the about to be defensive coordinator since 2019 when they hired him. It's kind of, and you are right. I mean, there's so many practices that we saw where, you'd see him, as soon as Terrell Edmonds, and Minkah Fitzpatrick's roles were done, they'd walk right to him and then they would just pick his brain and he would be telling them what they didn't do or what they need to do and those type of things. And we've heard Minkah Fitzpatrick on the calls. He'd be adamant, we don't want people to know how good this guy is because he's really doggone good. I still think that a lot of people out there that are just like, oh, he's an internal hire. This was lazy. They didn't really do their due diligence. They're just hiring. So I feel like people are just complaining to complain at that point. You don't know how good Terrell Austin's going to be with the Steelers defense. If you want to point to guys who had failures before they came and lit it up with the Steelers, go look at Dick LeBeau. He didn't do well with the Bengals when he became their head coach, came back to the Steelers and drew up when he was one of the best defensive coordinators in the history of football with them. I'm not saying Terrell Austin is going to have that kind of impact on the defense, but I am saying I don't think that it's fair to him to just label him as just a lazy move by the Steelers. This won't work out at all.
And in some sense, I mean, he's got more experience at this even than Keith Butler because he's run a defense himself at previous stops. As you acknowledged, sometimes good, sometimes bad. But unlike some of the other internal hires that, were lambasted maybe fairly, he does have legitimate NFL experience on his resume. He's far more qualified for this position, regardless of if he was on staff or not already, than Matt Canada was when he was promoted, or Adrian Clem when he was promoted, or even Sean Surratt when he was promoted. So that part of it doesn't, make much of doesn't move the meter much for me. And, to get back to what his role is actually going to be, how it's going to intersect with Tomlin's role, I almost look at it like this, Chris. Tell me if you think this is kind of on point or not.
Okay.
So Tomlin, the defensive play caller, that's kind of what I would label him, in addition to obviously being the head coach. Keith Butler was kind of the front seven defensive coordinator, and Terrell Austin has been that secondary defensive coordinator. So I think that was already a collective effort from those three guys, and now one of them is riding off into the sunset, and I think the other two are probably on the same page with a lot of what they want.
Actually, I think that's a very good description of what the Steelers were doing because, like you said, and again, and I said, even if Keith Butler was the whole coordinator that put together the secondary and the defensive front,
that's part of title indicated, but we know it's not always that simple. There's not many teams out there who have co-defensive coordinators.
Exactly. And you don't want to cause even more suspicion or people asking, well, what's this about? It's just, hey, we have a guy that had been in wait for, and the other thing is also the politics of it. Keith Butler turned down several jobs while he was
respected guy in the franchise and well deserved.
And he wanted that opportunity to be defensive coordinator. It's just that Mike Tomlin's like, hey, this is how we run the show. And I do think that makes a lot of sense because one thing a lot of people, and I've said this several times in the show by now, but a lot of people think that the coordinator, it's just Madden. It's just, hey, you just call the plays for the defense. It's not that simple. The coordinator's job primarily is to put together the game plan, and it's what we talk about with the offense. You want to make sure that like how Matt Canada needs to have a good relationship with each of his positional coaches on offense to say, hey, we're going to put all these plans together. It's the same thing with the defense. You need to make sure your defensive line's on point with Carl Dunbar. You need to make sure the secondary is on point with Terrell Austin. You need to make sure the linebackers are on point with Jerry Osowski, and then put all that together and say, all right, what's the best plan of attack that we can have to disrupt the upcoming offenses? And that's a factor here. And I also think it's important to note, a lot of people are saying like, oh, the Steelers it's the play calling on defense that works. That's terrible. I'm not so sure that play calling is the issue. Most of the Steelers' problems have come defensively when there's been, they've lost the war of attrition, where they've just lost a lot of the wrong pieces at the wrong time. Their run defense fell off the cliff this year because they suffered a lot of injuries up front on the defensive line, and then Devin Bush couldn't get back to where he was before his ACL injury. I think, you look at 2020 against the Browns, they missing Bud Dupree, missing Devin Bush, missing Joe Hayden, all those guys. Terrell Edmonds wasn't playing as he had been earlier that season after he got COVID. Same for Vince Williams. A lot of things have just happened, I think, in inopportune moments. But it was Josh Taylor, who I had on the show yesterday, Josh Taylor from KDKA TV. He pointed out, he said, Chris, of the last 29 wins over the last 3 seasons that the Steelers have had, he said, of those 29 wins, 22 of them came in games where opponents scored 20 points or less, and the Steelers won the turnover battle. If you're talking about basically winning, and he said there were 24 times that happened. He said over the last 3 years, they're 22 1-1 when they hold a team to 20 points or less and win the turnover battle. First of all, that's ridiculous. That means every year you're basically getting half the season where the defense just crushes somebody's soul. And it shows when you think about 22, it means they had 7 wins where their defense wasn't playing at an elite level. I think that shows that the defense is a big reason why this team even remains competitive at all.
Yeah, I mean, you look around the league right now, the days of dominant defenses are basically over. I mean, the 49ers were challenging that in this postseason, but
they were.
Ultimately they didn't get it done. People want to talk about, well, it's still defense that wins championships. Not really. Opportunistic defense, maybe like the Bengals in the second half against the Chiefs, but they're not a team built around their defense, obviously. And clearly, the Rams are good on defense, but they made so many adjustments to get better on offense. So I look at it as the playoff failures for the Steelers defensively over the last 5 years. Nobody should feel good about that. Nobody should feel safe with that. I mean, that's ultimately what every season hinges on. But I wasn't covering the team before 2019, but from what I've heard, a lot of the issues when they were really struggling back then, especially in pass coverage, you heard a lot about miscommunications between players and, busts in coverage.
Yeah.
I feel like I've heard less of that since Terrell Austin took over. So that's a point for him, I would say, in the job that he's done so far with the Steelers. Now, the run defense last year, very, very bad. And it reminds me of something that Keith Butler told us one Thursday morning in his weekly presser. And, it made a lot of sense to me, was that when they do design those game plans that you were talking about every week, him, Tomlin, Terrell Austin, I'm sure the other defensive coaches get input there too. Butler's a former NFL linebacker. He's coached linebackers his whole career in the NFL. He's been with the Steelers since 2003. Mike Tomlin came in from the outside in 2007.
Right.
He's been coaching defensive backs his whole career. Butts didn't say all that, but his point was that I'm a stop the run guy first. I'm a linebacker D-line guy first. Mike's a secondary guy first. And he's the boss, basically. So I think that does go into, the overall plan each week. And, now one half of that equation or a third, whatever you want to call it, is no longer there. And the onus is going to be even more on Tomlin to get this thing figured out more consistently. Because like you said, the regular season success has been there. They can't take a step back on defense at this point.
No, exactly. No, I think that's a huge part of this. A huge part of what the Steelers are looking at, with Terrell Austin taking over, and with what Keith Butler was doing. Absolutely, he was more that. I mean, I remember the report that Keith Butler was banging the table to get Diontae Hightower in the I think it was the 20 whenever they drafted David DeCastro. He wanted that input, and that was before he was defensive coordinator. But you are right. I think everyone has different roles and different styles of coaching. I think it's going to be very intriguing to see where how things play forward with who kind of, how does this team continue to develop? Does this team continue to be one of the best pass rushing units in the NFL, or the best pass rushing unit? They had the most sacks for 5 straight years. You can't beat that when it comes to pass rushing. But does they take a step back there in favor of something else? But you are absolutely right. Communication has not been the issue. That was one of my biggest questions when I started getting into the Steelers locker room. I think it was like 2017 was the first year that I got to like be around the team a little bit more. And one of my biggest questions was always communication, because that was such an issue. There was always a breakdown, whether it was Mike Mitchell or Artie Burns or whoever was in the secondary at that time, Antoine Blake or whoever in the mid 2010s. But that hasn't been an issue. It's been hey, talent. We got beat in this situation. We were supposed to be here. We were here, but we just lost this spot, or this guy just beat us here, or we had to try to help against the run, and that kind of messed us up a little bit. I do think that's one of the biggest challenges for Terrell Austin is going to be balancing what they're trying to do in that secondary and what he wants to make them, how he wants to make them a turnover group to get the turnovers and to make the big plays, while not compromising what the Steelers traditionally, when you think of the Pittsburgh Steelers, is that they stop the run and they sack the quarterback, balancing those two identities to make whatever his defense will be known as in Pittsburgh.
And certainly it helps to have Minkah Fitzpatrick on the back end, right? His addition coincided with Terrell Austin taking over as the secondary coach. So, but that works both ways. You've got to have talent. You've got to have guys coaching them up and getting the most out of them. So, yeah, in terms of, scheming up the pass rush, I think to some degree, I could coach the Steelers on that. I say, hey, number 90,
go get him.
Just go run past that right tackle and go get the guy with the ball. All right, cool, break.
Hey, 97, come here. Beat him within an inch of his life, and then go get the quarterback.
But I'm not saying that's all Keith Butler was doing, but I'm saying Brian Batko could at least instruct those two guys for a season and probably get a decent amount of production out of them.
Certainly, but but I do think it's going to be interesting to see what their attitude is there. I mean, we still have to see who kind of takes over, if anyone does, in kind of a pass rush coordinator almost for the Steelers, because you still got Carl Dunbar, you still got Jerry Osofsky with his wife passed away, so he had to kind of leave the team in the middle of the season. We'll see what's the identity of the Steelers, and also with the surprise departure of Ike Hilliard, is there such a move coming for the defense? I think there's a lot of things coming, and you still have to find an offensive line coach. So lots of questions there, but I think the bottom line is, people presuming what Terrell Austin's defense is going to look like for the Steelers, I think are fooling themselves. You might see the same sort of play calls, but there might be a different kind of concepts and just, I guess, emphasis on what the Steelers defense is about to win games. Again, that Steelers defense has carried them to most of their wins of the last 3 seasons. And basing off of how they're looking right now, going into the NFL draft and free agency on offense, they're going to need to do so in the next couple seasons as well. Brian, thanks so much for joining us here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. You're always a wonderful guest. You do great work at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Let people know they can find you, follow you, and get more of your work.
Yeah, post-gazette.com/Steelers. Take you to our Steelers landing page. It's in the off season, but we've still got plenty of stuff going up there. Twitter's just my name right there, Brian Batko. Yeah, thanks for having me, Carter. It's always a good time, man.
Same here. Check out Brian Batko and all the work that they do at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. They are amazing at what they do. I'm Chris Carter, host of the Locked On Steelers podcast. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Carter Critiques. You can find this show on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Odyssey, and YouTube. If you're watching this video on YouTube, hit the like button. It helps us out. Also, you can subscribe to our channel for all of our daily content. If you want to help us out further, go on Apple Podcasts, leave us a 5-star review with a positive comment, and you will get a shout out at the end of the show. Thanks so much again to Brian for coming on for the Thursday episode of the Locked On Steelers podcast. We'll have Jenna Harner wrapping up the weekend. We'll finally talk about the Super Bowl and get you our predictions on that, getting you ready for the weekend. Thanks so much for tuning in. Be back in your ears and on your screens very soon.